Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference and of the workshop for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to present Gödel's theological notes, as the title of the talk is. I'm well aware of the fact that this talk might be slightly off topic as far as incompleteness, for example, is concerned, but I don't think it's off topic as far as the workshop or the title of the workshop is concerned, because it certainly is a major aspect of Gödel's unpublished work on theology. And I would like to start with a few quotes which you would find when you search for, or when you Google for Gödel and Religion or Gödel and Theology. Well, first of all, you would find some material about the ontological proof, of course, which I'm not going to mention a lot today. And then you would probably find things that Hao Wang has published in his reflections. For example, these answers, Gödel's answers to a questionnaire, the Grandjean questionnaire, which he never sent back, where he says, what is your religion? Baptized Lutheran, but not member of any religious congregation. My belief is theistic, not pantheistic, following Leibniz rather than Spinoza. That is quite a well-known fact, but it belongs to what I call the tip of an iceberg if as far as his writings about theology are concerned. And I'll give you one or two more quotes from this tip of the iceberg before we go to the iceberg itself. This is what his wife Adele told Hao Wang after Gödel's death. She says Gödel, although he did not go to church, was religious and read the Bible in bed every Sunday morning. You might have heard that before. And I'll come back to his reading of the Bible in a few minutes, definitely. Nothing much is known about why he read the Bible and how he did it. Also, if you dig a little bit deeper into the material, you will find this very condensed list headed My Philosophical Viewpoint oder Meine philosophischen Ansichten. And it has 14 items, 14 short items, and number 13 is there is a scientific exact philosophy and theology which deals with the concepts of the highest abstractness. If you look at the original, by the way, this is the kind of material we are dealing with when we're talking about Gabelsberger shorthand writing. But if you look at item number 13, yes, you can see here that theology was added at some later time after philosophy. And it also has a little footnote saying, und diese ist auch für die Wissenschaft höchst fruchtbar, and this one is also highly fruitful for science, theology. So these are things you might find. And I now come to material concerning theology that hasn't been published before. For example, this remark here from his Max Phil books. There are two approaches to everything, an empirical one and a priori one. Examples, and I only give you the example concerning theology. Theology through revelation and natural theology. Of course, these 2 points have to be swapped because the theology through revelation is the a priori approach, and natural theology is the empirical one. In principle, the empirical approach is always superfluous, just as language is in principle superfluous for recognition. It is the crutch for the weak, die Krücke für den Schwachen, therefore for human beings in general. I would like to explain what kind of material we have found in the Nachlass concerning theology. And I'll start with, a notebook called Theology 1, nur Vorlesungen, which means lectures only. And it is not very well known that Gödel attended about nearly 30 theological lectures in the winter term 1937, 1938. Taking notes, and these are preserved in exactly this notebook, only lectures. This would be the first page. It's like an index to the lectures. I haven't translated this, but you can have a look at it. Reading the Bible, Dogmatics, Catholic philosophy, history, demonology. That's an interesting point. A lecture about demonology, psychology of theology, and the last one is truth of the Christian worldview. I think on the same page I was just showing you, there's a little comment or a little question which says in German, nach welchen Büchern studieren die Theologiestudenten, or what are the books that the theology students follow or use? And then written or started at the same time in Vienna and then continued later in America, there's a very long list about theological literature, about 100 items. I show you a little snippet from this long list. You can see here that, well, I mentioned about 100 items, but the items may have more than one book or more than one source. For example, here at number 85, it's all books about the religion of the Manichaeism. And he's read books about it, but he also knows the writings of Augustinus, which he definitely has read in Latin. So it's a huge list of literature that he has seen. Theology number 2 seems to be missing or is lost. So the next notebook we have is Theology 3, which is of quite different character from number 1. This is the cover of the book, and it mainly has, and it says it here, articles from a theological encyclopedia, amongst other things like a return to Fehler in der Bibel, mistakes in the Bible. We'll return to that in a few minutes, but it's mainly articles or excerpts from articles, and a typical page would look like this one here. You get the kind of keywords like devil and excommunication and things like this. Here, also a demon. Here's a demon called Lilith. You also get the verses and the books from the Bible where you find information, well, about the devil, quite a few probably. Also in between, and they are scattered amongst the pages, are own comments, general comments about theology, and I'll return to this one here later on because it plays an important role in another context. There are 2 long handwritten lists of questions and remarks, well hidden in the Nachlass. One of them was hidden in book number 7, preparing his Notre Dame logic lectures. So you really find surprises here and there, wherever you read. Very interesting remarks and questions. Then, as I said, I'm going to show you some material about his biblical studies, which he was in part doing on a Sunday morning in bed. And of course, we've heard that today. There are the Max Phil notebooks, 15 of them, once lost. And if you count the theological remarks, it would be about 90, but it's very hard to count because these 90 are the ones marked as theological, and many other comments on philosophy and on logic are mixed with theological remarks and questions. And again, I'm going to show you a couple of examples later on. When you read all this, you will find out that Gödel's program or Gödel's theological work can be splitted into what I would call dimensions, theological dimensions. And the first one is a search for basic concepts and for axioms describing these concepts. And that is not surprising at all, because we know that Gödel, and we've heard that today, had this program for other sciences. He's been doing this, of course, for philosophy, physics, but also for psychology. The main program was the search for basic concepts and description by axioms. A second dimension would be a similar direction, but here he would take the Catholic dogma as an axiom. Literally, he would take the literal Catholic dogma as an axiom. He would translate them into logic, and well, at least that's the idea, and then build a kind of Catholic theology on top of this fundamental dogma. Third dimension, I would say certainly his biblical studies. And the last one, which I mentioned already, is a connection between theology and religion on the one hand side, and logic and mathematics on the other hand side. And I can only show you a few examples and snippets later on, which I will. But I'll go back to item number 1, basic concepts. Here's a remark concerning philosophy, but we can also take it for other sciences. My work concerning philosophy shall consist in an analysis of the highest concepts, the logical and psychological ones. That is, what is to be done in the end is to write down a list of these concepts and to consider the possible axioms, theorems, and definitions for them. Of course, and that's interesting because we heard the nice talk about application, of course, including their application to the empirical given reality, of course. There are lists of these basic concepts. Here's one headed as a philosophical remark. Have a look at them: reason, cause, positiveness, and God. These are two concepts which reappear in the ontological proof, and there you find the formal definitions for these concepts. Many and one, we had many and one today, essence, and many others. Now this is philosophy and metaphysics, but you also get these collections, or we found collections of theological concepts. I don't have to read them to you. Have a look at them. This quote comes from one of the long lists of questions and remarks. So to determine these concepts according to the logical category, define them and introduce terminology for them, following the language usage, and formulate principles. The German was Grundsätze, but that would be, of course, axioms and formal definitions. And then that's quite interesting. Afterwards, examine at any heresies, for example, Michael Baius, Luther, etc., whether decidable or provable. So that's his theological, or part of his theological program, which unfortunately we haven't been able to find yet. That would be quite interesting to see. The second dimension I mentioned was dogmatics. And this is one of his comments on one of those lists. Cannot the dogma be perfectly exact, similar to theoretical physics? This is what Gödel says. And one of the lists starts like this. These are all remarks concerning the Catholic dogma. For example, here's one: if A is a dogma at some time, it is a dogma at any later time. Or every dogmatic property is true. He was not quite sure if he should write dogma or doctrine. You can see that in different places, but it's about dogmatic properties and other descriptions about the Catholic dogma. Now, if you read these carefully and put the details into models of branching time, you could, for example, put in a dogma into the model as soon as it's revealed and the church has defined it officially. But then, as Gödel wrote, once it is defined, it will always be there. And to cut this a bit short, as you can see, if you introduce connectors, you'll end up in a kind of dogmatic, propositional, intuitionistic logic, where you can simply replace the general notion of proposition by the notion of the Catholic dogma. Now, this is nothing that we found in his notes, but here's a very concrete comment, which says dogma and doctrine, etc., also constitute two modalities. In German it is Dogma and Lehrmeinung, bilden auch zwei Modalitäten. And these are axioms which I added because I tried to, well, first of all, the D, of course, now is the dogma operator. And the L is Lehrmeinung or doctrine. Lehrmeinung in German, well, that would be an opinion that you would teach or that you are allowed to teach. And I tried to find these formal axioms in original Catholic writings, and I'm going to show you 2 or 3 examples. For example, the relation between the two operators, an old one from Pius the 12th. But if the Supreme Pontiffs in their official documents purposely pass judgment on a matter up to that time under dispute, it is obvious that that matter, according to the mind and the will of the pontiffs, cannot be any longer considered a question open to discussion among theologians. So that would be at least one direction of this axiom. And the second example would be modal distribution, or the axiom K. If both premises are immediately revealed truths, then the conclusion also must be regarded as being immediately revealed and as the object of immediate divine faith. Now, these writings are not concerned with logic or with axioms or whatever. They're just ordinary Catholic dogmatic writings. And the last one I have, but I'll let you read this on your own, concerns an axiom T, or kind of veridicality, if you like, but truth. I'll give you a minute. So, I hope I didn't interrupt you there. The last one is slightly more difficult to explain. In this case, you would have to interpret the operator more like what is called a Catholic truth. Catholic truth are historical facts, but also philosophical facts which do not contradict theological teaching. I want this for 2 reasons. Well, first of all, I want to be able to translate between propositional logic and this modal logic. I want the S4 system, but also it gives us the possibility to have the rule of necessitation. Because if you can prove a proposition, if you can prove something that's a philosophical fact which doesn't contradict theological teaching, and that means you can take it as a Catholic fact. This is the translation I was mentioning, just as an aside. If you substitute the provability operator and put in the dogma now, and on the left-hand side now, you don't have the general notion of proposition, but the Catholic dogma. You can just translate, do the same translation as usual. In order to see this logic, or this idea, Gödel's idea, in action, we're not going to read all this, but I would like to show you that, just an example, a case study that I did. These are the axioms or the dogmas concerning Trinity, Catholic dogmas concerning Trinity. You can see the divine persons, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so this is my translation, or interpretation, I should say. And you have procession and generation and inspiration. And as a case study, I took the famous Filioque clause, which is an addition to an old creed, to the Athanasian Creed. And again, this is only the last step of the proof. But down here, you have the information of the dogma that the Holy Spirit has been inspired by the Son. And this is actually the Filioque clause, which has been a long dispute between the Western and the Eastern Church. And I took this one as an example because I knew that Gödel commented on the Filioque. I give you Gödel's remark from the Max Phil book. Perhaps the correct creed should be neither the Greek nor the Latin one, but have propter filium instead of Filioque. In any way, maybe the Greek church limits itself to what is absolutely correct. Besides, the Catholic Church says some things which cannot be said directly in a distorted form. Thus, correct faith, Greek plus a certain modification of the difference between Catholic and Greek. So that was the reason why I'm going back here, why I took the proof of the Filioque as a case study, as an example to see Gödel's idea of the dogma operator in action. The third dimension was Gödel's biblical studies. And this is a little paper which tells us what he has read, but it says gelesen Lateinisch. So this is a little list of what he has read in Latin. It is absolutely clear that he has read Lutheran version of the Bible in German. But then in 45, he lists what he has read in Latin, and we get a very similar paper in 64, which says, außerdem gelesen Lateinisch, additionally read in Latin. And then he names a few books. And here it says, überhaupt noch nicht gelesen, not read at all. But from other papers, we know that he has more or less read the whole of the Bible in Latin. He must have had excellent Latin. Good, that's absolutely sure. I go back to the notebook Theology 3, which had on the cover a little comment, Fehler in der Bibel, mistakes in the Bible. And it is really only this very short list, which came to a surprise, because it's really very little things that he takes as mistakes. He would add a known, he would delete a known, and other very little things. And that's all that was in the book. And I never thought about it until we found other little snippets like this one. He was obviously interested in commissions which worked on, pontifical commissions, which worked on bringing the Latin Bible, which is called the Vulgata or Vulgate, closer to the Urtext, to the very old versions that the commissions had, like Hieronymo and Old Greek and Hebrew versions. So Gödel was very much interested in these corrections to the Bible, to the Latin Bible. And then, not very long ago, we found about 40 of these pages, which are nothing but very, very careful studies, sentence by sentence and verse by verse, with little corrections. This here says Fehler, this little mark here, Fehler. So you get little corrections to the Bible, and this seems to be what he has been doing on a Sunday morning in bed. So many writings. I did transcribe them all, and well, of course I did submit them to 2 or 3 theological journals, but it was maybe a bit too much material, and maybe they didn't know the name. So we're going to see what we're going to do with them. The last dimension that I have figured out so far is the connection between religion, theology on the one hand side, and logic and mathematics on the other hand side. And I can only give you just a few examples, mostly from the Max Phil books. Here's one. Everything that can be understood somehow is either perfectly clear, that what can be known, or reasonably clear. I think the German was einigermaßen klar. An example, axiom of replacement. These 2 items were marked as analytical. I haven't put that at the margin, it had analytical. And then here's number 3, plausible. That is acceptable due to aesthetical reasons or reasons of completeness. And here comes the important question, Gödel's question, of course. Can the plausible be made analytical by means of God's perfection? And I can now return to the little remark that I was showing you in the book Theology 3, as far as, there it is again, as far as logic on the one hand side and God and God's perfection on the other hand side is concerned. And this is the transcription. Transformation of subjective into objective concepts through the mediation of God. Have a look at them. And we'll just leave them and you can think about them if you like. Here's another one. If one could construct a contradiction in mathematics, this result would speak in an eminent manner for the religious and against the scientific worldview, for this fact would be directly equivalent with the tightening of certain religious sentences, namely, the world has an end. Number 2 is man cannot know anything. Even in fields where one seems to know most, one knows the least possible, namely contradiction. And number 3, science is a betrayal. And this world is an illusion. So again, you see the connection between, well, mathematics, contradictions in mathematics, and the theological worldview. I think 2 more concerning the logic of the angels. It is likely that within the area of natural numbers, not only all propositions can be decided, but also all concepts can be defined. That is, the quantifiers are sufficient. In the higher theories, the quantifiers are probably no longer sufficient. The different logic of the angels. The angels reappear every now and then and seem to be very present, as well as the demons. And the last one, the material part of analysis is the physics of our 3-dimensional space, that of set theory, probably the material world of the angels. What does propositional calculus and number theory correspond to? In addition, the psychology of certain beings probably corresponds to each of these fields. So I think that was the last quote I was giving you. You can see it's quite a lot of material, especially the Max Phil books have a lot of little comments. And well, today I hope that I was able to today to give you an impression of the kind of material. And I thank you very much for your attention.